1 second before we were meant to exchange our vows, my groom called a halt in front of the entire ballroom of guests. He was not nervous. He had not forgotten his lines. Instead, he turned around and reached his hand out toward the side doors of the banquet hall. The spotlight aggressively followed his gesture, landing on another woman. She wore a short white cocktail dress, a timid smile hanging on her face. Like a frightened white rabbit, she walked up the stage step by step, taking the place that was supposed to belong to me. I had picked out my wedding dress myself. It was a custom haute couture piece worth over $1 million. Every inch of the French lace was embroidered with the words Mrs. Vance. Yet at this moment, it felt like a magnificent set of shackles, pinning me to the stage for everyone to witness this long premeditated humiliation. The bride standing there today was supposed to be her. My groom, Preston Vance, wrapped his arm around the woman's shoulder. His tone was as flat as if he were announcing the evening's dinner menu. Then, he finally looked at me, his eyes entirely devoid of emotion. "Claire, you can step down now." The crowd below erupted. Gasps, whispers, and several undisguised scoffs echoed from the VIP section. My future mother-in-law, Beatrice Vance, sat with her chin raised, a predictable smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Her expression clearly said, "Look, I told you that you were never good enough for my son." I did not cry, I did not make a scene, nor did I ask a single question. I simply raised my hands and gently unpinned the heavy, diamond-encrusted veil from my head. The diamonds caught the harsh light, fracturing it into tiny, blinding shards that made my eyes sting slightly. But the icy calm in the depths of my heart had already frozen over any rising emotions. I gave Preston and that woman the slightest, most imperceptible nod, like a final bow to a remarkably boring theatrical performance. Then I turned around. Gathering the overly extravagant skirts of my gown in both hands, I walked steadily down the aisle toward the exit in my 4-inch stilettos. My back was perfectly straight. Behind me, I heard Preston's voice, clearly stunned by my reaction before forcing a mask of composure. "Let the ceremony continue." I did not look back. The sharp clicking of my heels against the polished marble floor echoed clearly down the empty, cavernous hotel corridor. The moment the heavy banquet doors shut behind me, they severed the noise and the absurd continuation of that farce. The air out here smelled of a faint room spray, mixing with the sickeningly sweet gardenia perfume I wore. I did not head for the main elevators. Instead, I turned into the adjacent fire stairwell. The heavy, fireproof door clicked shut, and the world instantly went silent, leaving only the sound of my own breathing. Leaning against the cold concrete wall, I reached deep into the heavy tulle layers of my skirt and pulled out an ultra-thin burner phone. This piece of plastic was entirely out of place with my glamorous attire, but it was my ultimate leverage. I swiped the screen open. No missed calls. Just one text from a contact saved as father. "Do you need a cleanup crew?" My fingers tapped the screen, remarkably steady. Even surprising myself, no. Proceed with the original plan. Pick me up in 3 minutes at the freight elevator exit in the underground garage. Wipe all security footage. During the few dozen seconds I waited for the message to send, I slowly peeled off the lace gloves that symbolized my marital vows and tossed them carelessly into the corner of the stairwell. Then I grabbed the complex corset lacing and the zipper at the back of my dress and gave a violent yank. The sound of tearing fabric was exceptionally harsh in the quiet stairwell, yet it was the most beautiful music to my ears. Like shedding an old skin, I broke free from this dress that carried countless blessings and today's ultimate humiliation. Underneath, I was already wearing a simple black tracksuit and a pair of flat sneakers. I bundled the extravagant wedding dress into a massive heap and shoved it deep into the industrial trash can on the landing. Having finished, I pushed open the door on the other side of the stairwell and slipped into the staff corridor. I knew the layout by heart. Bypassing all areas where employees might be, I navigated the winding halls until I reached the dedicated freight elevator leading straight to the VIP underground parking garage. The elevator doors slid open silently. It was empty. The numbers ticked down. With a soft ding, the doors opened on level B2. An unmarked, heavily armored black Cadillac Escalade sat quietly waiting. 2 muscular men in sharp black suits stood by the vehicle. Seeing me, they bowed slightly and pulled the door open without a single word. The moment I slid into the back seat, the person sitting next to me handed over a stainless steel thermos and a brand new smartphone. "Hot water. The signal on the old phone has been jammed and the SIM card destroyed. This is your new secure number. Only the chairman, madam, and a few core executives have it." I took the thermos and took a sip. The warmth slid down my throat, driving out the last trace of chill born from pure fury settling in my bones. I was not heartbroken. I was furious. Furious at Preston's stupidity, exhausted by this pathetic farce, and feeling a sense of absurdity at my own temporary compromise of living as the plain, unassuming Claire Simmons for the past 3 years. The Upper East Side apartment and every location leased under the identity of Claire Simmons have been sanitized, the executive assistant continued. All personal belongings have been either destroyed or discreetly relocated per your orders. Your digital footprint has been completely wiped. Even if Preston Vance tries to investigate, the most he will find is that Claire Simmons returned from overseas 3 years ago with a clean but remarkably average background. Before that, a total blank. Though I doubt he has the mind to look that deeply. I pulled at the corner of my mouth, looking out the tinted window at the rapidly retreating city streets. He was probably too busy enjoying a wedding with his true love right now. The Escalade drove into a heavily guarded, incredibly understated ultra-luxury estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. This was my real home. Preston thought he was abandoning a helpless, ordinary girl with no connections. Little did he know that behind the door he just slammed shut stood the most powerful old money dynasty on the East Coast. The woman he publicly humiliated at his wedding was an existence he could never even dream of reaching. The vehicle rolled to a stop in front of the main manor. My father was already standing on the stone steps. Approaching 60, his posture was immaculate, his gaze razor-sharp. Looking at me now, his eyes held paternal concern, but mostly a calm, calculating assessment. I stepped out of the car and walked up to him, calling out to him. He looked me up and down. Seeing my simple clothes and calm demeanor, he nodded. You didn't suffer any real loss. You took a minor hit to your pride. He will vomit it all back out with interest very soon. A very faint smile appeared on his face. Spoken like my daughter. Go inside. Your mother is worried. I pushed open the doors to the conservatory. My mother hurried over. She didn't ask about the details of the wedding. She just took my hands, touched my cheek, and sighed. She was a woman of classic, aristocratic elegance, gentle on the outside but possessing a core of pure steel. You suffered an injustice. A blind, foolish man like that is not worth 3 years of your youth. I squeezed her hands back. It wasn't a waste. Using the identity of Claire Simmons allowed me to see everything with crystal clarity. Preston is arrogant but fundamentally weak, easily manipulated by that kind of woman. Vance Enterprises looks glamorous on the outside, but internally, the mother and son have torn it apart with their mismanagement. Several of their recent, seemingly brilliant investments were secretly guided by our shadows. Once we pull the support pillars, the collapse will be extremely fast. My mother nodded, her eyes filled with absolute support. Do whatever you want to do. This family will always be your shield. Returning to my private suite within the estate, I took a hot bath, washing away the last sticky residue of that wedding. Changing into a silk robe, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the quiet night descending over the manicured grounds. My phone vibrated. It was the first unknown caller on this new device. I glanced at the last 4 digits. It was Preston's private number. He found me faster than I expected. I answered without speaking. The other end was silent for 2 seconds before Preston's voice came through. The background was slightly noisy, suggesting he was still at the wedding reception but had stepped into a quiet corner. His tone was complex, a bit impatient, inexplicably irritable, and perhaps laced with a sliver of apprehension and doubt he refused to admit even to himself. Claire, where are you? I let out a soft chuckle and did not answer. He raised his voice. I know what happened today is hard for you to accept, but Chloe, she waited for me for too long. I can't fail her. Be reasonable and come back on your own. The wedding didn't happen for us, but I won't shortchange you on your compensation. I can transfer the deed of that Upper East Side apartment to your name. I'll also give you a credit card with no limit. I cut him off. My voice traveled through the signal, flat and entirely devoid of emotion. Preston. He froze. I continued. That apartment on the Upper East Side. You bought it using the funds from that highly questionable short-term bridge loan Vance Enterprises took out in the 3rd quarter of last year, didn't you? As for the credit card, I laughed lightly. Keep it for your honeymoon with Miss Sutton. I wish you a very happy marriage. Before he could react, I hung up and permanently blocked the number. He had no idea that he and his crumbling Vance Enterprises were about to become the very first sacrifices in my counterattack. Early the next morning, dressed in a sharply tailored designer suit, I sat in the executive office on the top floor of our Manhattan headquarters. Outside the massive glass windows was the iconic New York City skyline. My assistant placed several dossiers in front of me. According to the plan, we have quietly begun dumping the circulating shares of Vance Enterprises we hold. We have also contacted their primary creditors on Wall Street. Furthermore, the final approval documents for the highly contested Hudson Bay Resort project that Preston has been fighting tooth and nail to secure will be issued this afternoon. The winning bid will go to our wholly owned subsidiary. I flipped through the documents. What is Preston's reaction? He is still looking for Claire Simmons. He sent people to every property you previously leased. Naturally, they found absolutely nothing. He seems to believe you are simply hiding out of extreme heartbreak. Additionally, his mother, Beatrice Vance, is currently spreading rumors in their social circles. She claims that Claire Simmons tried to marry out of her league, realized her own inadequacy, and ran away out of shame. I closed the folder. Excellent. Let them enjoy their delusion for 2 more days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, while I was listening to a briefing on an overseas acquisition, my assistant walked in holding an exquisite gold-stamped envelope. The item you requested has arrived. I opened the envelope. Inside was an invitation to the highest-tier charity gala in the city, co-hosted by several of the oldest, most powerful billionaire dynasties. The guest of honor was the heiress who had just returned from overseas. Preston would absolutely bring his new wife to this gala. This was the venue he chose to officially introduce her to the so-called high society. I ran my fingers over the smooth texture of the invitation paper. Reply to the organizers, I will attend on time. Also, prepare the gown and jewelry I reserved previously. Do you want me to leak the news of your return to the press in advance? I shook my head. No need. Surprises are only fun when saved for the very last second. I want to reappear in front of Preston and Chloe at the exact moment they are drunk on their own success, thinking they have trampled me into the dirt, but from a height they could never possibly reach. I picked up the black coffee next to me and took a delicate sip. The bitter liquid left a sweet aftertaste, just like the taste of revenge. Preston's people had practically turned the entire city upside down. He first went to the luxury apartment where Claire had lived. Using his spare key, he opened the door to find it as sterile as a model home. The living room, bedroom, and study were completely devoid of any personal items. The closet was mostly empty, leaving behind only a few expensive dresses he had bought for her, which she had never particularly liked. They hung there like a deliberate, mocking statement. Not a single strand of hair was left on the vanity. The executive tasked with the search reported to him, trembling. Mr. Vance, the building management said Miss Simmons hired a professional moving crew on the afternoon of the wedding. They emptied everything in exactly 2 hours. As for the security footage, the cameras happened to be down for electrical maintenance during that specific time. Standing in the middle of the empty living room, Preston's face turned an ugly shade of ash. The executive kept his head down, not daring to speak. Preston then went to the boutique architectural firm where Claire used to work, a cover job designed to fit her ordinary persona. The firm's managing partner looked entirely confused. Claire? She handed in her resignation a week ago. Said she wanted to focus entirely on preparing for the wedding. Her paperwork is completely cleared out. The coffee shop she frequented, her boutique gym, even the independent art galleries she occasionally browsed, everyone stated they hadn't seen her recently. The person known as Claire Simmons had evaporated like a drop of water in the desert air, leaving zero trace. Even her few friends, who were actually strategically placed assets to cover her identity, had simultaneously changed their contact information and vanished. This total, methodical, clinical disappearance was absolutely not the result of impulsive heartbreak or someone trying to escape reality. It required meticulous planning and terrifying execution capabilities. The irritation and microscopic guilt in Preston's chest were gradually being replaced by a creeping, insidious sense of dread. Sitting in his CEO office, his fingers tapped unconsciously against the mahogany desk. That woman had been with him for 3 years. She was gentle, understanding, almost excessively quiet. She never asked for expensive gifts. She silently endured his mother's petty bullying. He had always believed she loved him with a pathetic desperation and could never leave him. But now, the intercom buzzed, breaking his train of thought. Mr. Vance, Miss Sutton is here. Send her in. He rubbed his temples. Chloe pushed the door open, carrying an insulated thermos. She wore a sweet but slightly pitiful smile. Dressed in a brand new Chanel suit, she had rapidly immersed herself in the role of Mrs. Vance. Preston, you've been busy all morning. I made you some soup. Drink it while it's hot. She walked over, set the container down, and naturally tried to sit on his lap. Preston leaned back smoothly, dodging her. Her smile stiffened for a fraction of a second before she stood straight, opening the thermos and pouring the soup herself. Preston, are you still looking for Claire? She pushed the bowl toward him, her tone cautious, laced with perfectly calibrated sympathy. She really is too stubborn. How could she be so immature, just leaving without a word and making everyone worry? Your mother told me today that it's a blessing you didn't actually marry her. Someone so irrational could never handle being the lady of the Vance family. He didn't touch the soup. He looked at Chloe. You spent some time with her before. Did she ever mention any special friends or places she wanted to go? Chloe's eyes flickered briefly before she shook her head. No. Claire was actually quite antisocial. She never shared her private thoughts with me. She probably just felt too humiliated to face anyone and is hiding in some corner. After all, a scene like that yesterday. She put on a look of profound sorrow. It's all my fault. If I hadn't interrupted, it has nothing to do with you. It was my decision. Preston stopped her. He just couldn't understand. Claire's reaction and subsequent disappearance completely defied his expectations. It gave him an incredibly uncomfortable feeling that things were spiraling out of his control. Chloe bit her lip and changed the subject. By the way, Preston, the charity gala tomorrow night hosted by the Whitmore family. I've already selected my dress. It's a custom piece. Good. You handle it. He sounded distracted. This gala was critical. It was the perfect opportunity to officially integrate Chloe into the core social circles and project an image of stability for Vance Enterprises. He could not afford to be distracted by Claire's disappearance. Chloe leaned in a bit closer, lowering her voice. I heard a rumor. The heiress of the Sterling family, who has lived as a recluse in Europe for years, recently returned to the States. It's highly likely someone from the Sterling family will attend this gala, if we can just get a chance to speak with them. Her eyes gleamed with ambition. Preston's brow twitched. The Sterling family. They were the true apex predators of the city, a colossal entity with a global empire, incredibly low-key but possessing terrifying power. Compared to Sterling Holdings, Vance Enterprises was a puddle next to the Atlantic Ocean. If they could secure even a tiny shred of favor or a minor partnership with the Sterlings, Vance Enterprises would ascend overnight. This had been his late father's lifelong unfulfilled obsession. Is the source reliable? Very reliable. Mrs. Astor mentioned it. Her husband does some minor business with a distant branch of the Sterling family and caught wind of it. Chloe looked quite proud of herself. Having stepped into the role of Mrs. Vance, she was already deploying all her resources to build her network. Preston pondered for a moment. We will play it by ear tomorrow night. Do not approach the Sterlings uninvited. But if an opportunity presents itself, we must leave a flawless impression. I know, Chloe smiled sweetly. In her mind, she was already calculating how to outshine every other woman at this star-studded gala, especially any potential rivals. Claire was no longer a threat. She was stepping onto a much grander battlefield. Meanwhile, back at the Greenwich estate, I sat in my father's massive study. Across from me were the chief financial officer of Sterling Holdings and two senior investment directors. The massive digital screen on the wall displayed the 3-year financial trajectories and equity structures of Vance Enterprises. Vance's biggest hidden vulnerability right now is the massive short-term bridge loan they took out late last year to bid for the Hudson Bay Resort project, the CFO said, pointing at a glaring red section on the screen. That loan matures in the middle of next month. Given their current cash flow and the return rates on their active projects, the pressure to repay is immense. A senior director chimed in. They are actively courting Vanguard Peak Capital, hoping to secure a new bridge loan to cover the gap. I have already made a call to Vanguard. My father sat at the head of the table, tapping his finger lightly on the armrest. He looked at me. Your thoughts? My eyes locked onto the active projects listed under Vance Enterprises, specifically the luxury Hudson Bay Resort, the crown jewel Preston intended to use to solidify his reign as the new visionary CEO. Tell Vanguard Peak to keep entertaining them, but offer extremely predatory terms to drag out the clock. Meanwhile, I paused. Take the preliminary evidence we have regarding Vance cutting corners and using substandard materials on the Hudson Bay project, and anonymously send it to their biggest competitor. The competitor doesn't even need to prove it. They just need to flag it to the EPA and the Department of Buildings to trigger a federal inspection. The moment the investigation starts, the site will be shut down. Their cash chain will snap immediately. The CFO nodded. Understood. Additionally, we have been continuously short-selling Vance's circulating shares through offshore accounts. Rumors are starting to spread on Wall Street about their liquidity crisis. Their stock has taken a minor hit over the last 2 days. It hasn't dropped enough, I said coldly. Find 2 reputable financial news outlets. Give them a subtle tip about Vance's debt-to-equity ratio and the delays on their key projects. Nothing too aggressive, just a light touch. In the financial markets, confidence is more fragile than glass. The slightest breeze is enough to make institutional investors and retail sharks panic. My father's eyes gleamed with approval. If you push them too hard, too fast, a cornered dog might find a desperate way out. Apply the pressure slowly. Let them walk themselves into a dead end, step by step. Exactly. Preston's greatest source of pride was his ruthless business acumen and the Hudson Bay project he spearheaded. I wanted him to watch the very things he was most arrogant about disintegrate inch by inch. That would inflict far more agony than bankrupting him instantly. After the meeting, my executive assistant walked over with an iPad. We have the deep dive background check on Chloe Sutton you requested. I took the tablet. On the surface, Chloe was an art student who had returned from studying abroad, coming from a comfortable middle-class family. In reality, her father's construction material company had been drowning in debt for years. She kept the family afloat by networking her way through various older, wealthy men to secure resources. Her accidental encounter with Preston was a meticulously orchestrated trap. In fact, Preston had been in contact with her while we were still together, though it hadn't escalated to marriage back then. However, Beatrice Vance's growing disdain for my quiet, ordinary persona acted as a catalyst, accelerating her push to replace me with Chloe. There's more, the assistant paused. Chloe has recently been getting very close to a film producer named Maxwell. She is trying to secure funding for a streaming series to launch herself into the entertainment industry and elevate her social status. Producer Maxwell has a notorious reputation. He routinely trades roles for sexual favors. I raised an eyebrow. Compile all the hard evidence of Maxwell's past predatory behaviors and his dealings with Chloe. Mail it anonymously to the major gossip tabloids. Time the release for the morning right after tomorrow's gala. Let Chloe enjoy one night at the absolute peak of the social hierarchy before we drag her down to hell. The contrast will make the fall so much more entertaining. The assistant took meticulous notes. Are the gown and jewelry for the gala ready? Yes. A one-of-a-kind haute couture piece from a retired Italian master, and a suite of antique jewelry that has never been displayed to the public, just withdrawn from the family's Swiss vault. The styling team and your personal security detail are standing by. We will use the armored vehicle. The license plates will be swapped to civilian plates for the transit and changed back to the sterling diplomatic plates right before arriving at the venue. I nodded. Tomorrow night would mark my official return to the apex of this city's high society after 3 years. The objective was clear. Give Preston and Chloe a night they would never, ever forget. Preston loved being surrounded by sycophants, didn't he? He loved being looked up to. He felt Claire Simmons was too plain, too average for him. Then I would show him what true power looked like. I would show him the clouds he could never hope to touch. I walked to the window, gazing out over the impeccably manicured estate grounds. The setting sun washed everything in a layer of liquid gold. Claire Simmons was dead and buried. Tomorrow night, there would only be my true identity. The gold-stamped invitation rested on my fingertips, carrying the faint scent of expensive parchment. The calligraphy was bold and commanding. Venue, the Zenith Tower, the Pinnacle rotating ballroom. Time, tomorrow, 8:00 p.m. sharp. The hosts are the Whitmore, DuPont, and Stanford families, the assistant supplemented. This is arguably the most exclusive social event of the quarter. The guest list includes the elite legacy families, Titan CEOs, and several foreign dignitaries. Preston is bringing Chloe primarily to cement her status and to aggressively network for bridge loans. I put the invitation down and walked to the holographic projector in the center of the dressing room. The assistant tapped a tablet, and a 3D simulation of the Zenith Tower ballroom materialized, along with a detailed seating chart. My seat was placed at a VIP table directly adjacent to the main head table. My tablemates were representatives of families with equal standing or close ties to the Sterlings. Preston and Chloe were seated toward the middle back of the room, the zone reserved for new money and mid-tier executives. There was a massive physical and symbolic distance between his table and the head table. In this circle, where you sat, was a silent declaration of your exact worth. Security? I asked. Camera feeds for all hotel entrances, freight corridors, and the ballroom perimeter have been tapped. Your dedicated security detail will infiltrate the venue early, posing as service staff and unnoted guests. Additionally, as per your orders, we have placed a reliable journalist in the press pit who will ask very pointed questions regarding Vance Enterprises' liquidity at the appropriate moment. I nodded. The blade of public opinion was sometimes far more agonizing than a physical knife. The dress and the jewels? The assistant gestured toward the center of the massive walk-in closet. The dust cover was slowly unzipped. A shade of blue as deep and rich as the midnight ocean seized my vision. It wasn't a standard sapphire or navy. It was a royal blue velvet, so dark it bordered on black, shimmering with a profoundly mesmerizing, quiet luster under the spotlights. The gown was a vintage halter design. The back plunged into an elegant, deep V that reached the lumbar spine. It was devoid of any superfluous embellishments, relying entirely on architectural tailoring and the sheer weight of the premium velvet to project a fluid, powerful silhouette. The skirt fell to the ankles with a dangerously high slit on the side, revealing flashes of the leg as one walked. It exuded an overwhelming, restrained dominance. The matching jewelry sat on a black velvet tray nearby. No diamonds. It was a complete suite of untreated, natural cashmere royal blue sapphires set in antique platinum. The necklace was layered, featuring a center stone exceeding 20 carats, cut into an impeccable cushion shape. It was so deep it felt like it could absorb a person's soul. Earrings, a bracelet, and a massive cocktail ring meant for the index finger completed the set. Every stone was flawlessly matched in color and clarity, glittering with a cold, sovereign light. This suite of jewels was the former collection of European royalty, acquired by my father at a Sotheby's auction 3 years ago. The gown is the absolute final masterpiece of the Italian maestro. There is only one in the world, the assistant said quietly. He stated that only someone capable of commanding such silent power was worthy of wearing it. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the cool, liquid-smooth surface of the velvet. This was not a style that Chloe's tacky, brand-obsessed aesthetic could ever comprehend. I wanted an aura of terrifying authority. I wanted the absolute power of a predator surveying its prey. Perfect. Hair and makeup at 3:00 p.m. tomorrow. Returning to the study, I opened another dossier containing intelligence on individuals of note at the gala. My eyes lingered on one page. Julian Hayes. The current patriarch of the Hayes family, not even 35 years old, ruthless and razor-sharp. He had doubled his family's empire in recent years. The Hayes and Sterling families had some friction overseas, but no direct conflicts domestically, perhaps even room for strategic alliance. More importantly, Julian Hayes despised Preston Vance. They had a massive falling out in business school because Preston used underhanded tactics to steal a competition project from Julian. The enemy of my enemy might not be my friend, but he could certainly be a useful pawn to make my enemy suffer. I made a mental note. My phone buzzed. An encrypted message arrived. It was a single photo and a caption. The photo showed Preston and Chloe inside a high-end boutique fitting a tuxedo and gown. Chloe was smiling radiantly. Preston was looking at her, but his profile seemed deeply distracted. Caption: CEO Vance is aggressively utilizing underground channels to locate Claire Simmons, growing extremely erratic. Miss Sutton is feverishly preparing for the gala, aiming to outshine everyone. I typed a reply. Understood. Proceed as scheduled tomorrow night. I walked to the window. The Greenwich estate was peaceful and serene, a stark contrast to the desperate groom hunting for his ex, and the fake bride preparing for her social debut across the city. This peace came from absolute power and total control. My father walked in, holding 2 glasses of warm milk. He handed me one. Still reading? I took the glass. Tomorrow night might get a little chaotic. He took a sip, his expression utterly serene. A daughter of this family has every right to cause a little chaos. Just remember, no matter what you do, the entire Sterling Empire stands behind you. You control the narrative. Whether you want to slap their faces, crush them into the dirt, or uproot their entire lineage, do whatever makes you happy. He paused. But your mother told me to remind you, do not let that kind of trash ruin your mood. They aren't worth it. My heart warmed. Is Mom asleep? Just went to bed. She says she wants to personally supervise your styling tomorrow. He smiled, then his tone shifted to business. The Vance family's little moves have already begun. They are like a severely over-tightened violin string. We just need to apply the right amount of pressure at the right time, or simply snip the most vital chord. I understand. The corporate siege is a slow bleed. But tomorrow night's debut is the psychological kill shot. I will destroy Preston's most prized possessions, his ego and his illusion of control. The next afternoon, the estate's private styling suite was bustling with a top-tier glam squad. After my shower, I sat before the mirror. The stylist carefully blew out my long hair. We didn't do an elaborate updo. Instead, my hair was styled into seemingly effortless, yet meticulously calculated, soft waves that cascaded over my shoulders, the ends resting perfectly just below my collarbones, complementing the halter neckline of the gown. The makeup was the epitome of minimalist high fashion. The base was flawless and translucent, highlighting the natural glow of my skin. The eyes were contoured with deep browns and matte earth tones, creating a piercing, profound depth. The eyeliner was thin and elongated, the lashes distinct. For the lips, we chose a dusty rose with a soft matte finish. The entire look avoided any loud, obnoxious colors, yet it maximized my features, projecting an aura of cold, detached, untouchable beauty. When I slipped into the midnight blue velvet gown and the cashmere sapphires were clasped around my neck, even the seasoned styling team held their breath. The woman in the floor-to-ceiling mirror was regal, mysterious, and radiated an oppressive aura. The deep blue contrasted violently with my pale skin, making it look like cold jade. The gems pulsed with dark fire at my throat and wrists. The immaculate tailoring elongated my silhouette, making me look statuesque and commanding. Every time I moved, the high slit revealed a glimpse of a powerful, straight leg. There was no smile. My eyes were as calm as a dead sea, yet they seemed to hold the power to see through and subjugate everything in their path. This was no princess waiting for a prince. This was a queen holding the executioner's blade. My mother walked in. Her eyes grew slightly red before filling with immense pride. She stepped forward and adjusted a nearly invisible microscopic clasp on the back of my necklace. "Go," she whispered. "Let those blind fools see exactly what they threw away and exactly who they offended." My father stood in the doorway. He looked at me and said only 2 words. "Flawless." At 7:40 p.m., the heavily modified, deceptively low-key yet absurdly armored vehicle rolled out of the estate gates, heading straight for the Zenith Tower in Manhattan. My assistant sat in the passenger seat, communicating with the advanced security team via an encrypted earpiece. I leaned against the bespoke leather seats and closed my eyes to rest. My fingertips absent-mindedly traced the freezing surface of the sapphire ring on my index finger. 3 years of playing Claire Simmons felt like a prolonged, immersive theater performance. I had retracted all my claws, learning to be a normal, even submissive woman, just to clearly observe the true faces of Preston and those around him. Every moment of compromise, every time Beatrice Vance nitpicked me, every time Chloe Sutton threw a passive-aggressive jab, it had all turned into pure fuel, burning quietly in my chest. Not out of petty resentment, but for a meticulously calibrated reckoning. The vehicle glided smoothly into the hotel's VIP underground garage. The private elevator took us directly to the VIP lounge just outside the penthouse ballroom. The elevator doors slid open. 2 security agents in black suits bearing discreet lapel pins bowed deeply. I stepped out. My assistant trailed exactly half a step behind me. Through the closed, heavy gilded double doors of the ballroom, I could hear the faint, elegant strains of a jazz quartet and the low murmur of high society chatter. That was the battlefield. The gilded doors slowly swung inward. The dazzling light of crystal chandeliers, the intoxicating scent of expensive perfumes, aged cigars, and raw ambition poured out like a tidal wave. It was the distinct atmosphere of New York's absolute elite. When the maitre d' saw me, or more accurately, when he saw the invitation my assistant presented, his professional smile instantly transformed into overwhelming reverence, laced with a trace of genuine panic. "Right this way, Miss Sterling." He bowed so low his back was nearly parallel to the floor, his voice dropping several octaves. I didn't move immediately. My calm gaze swept over the Vanity Fair laid out before me. Men in bespoke Savile Row suits spoke in hushed tones. Women in dazzling jewels and couture gowns silently waged war against each other. But beneath the soft jazz, you could feel the undercurrents of calculation, evaluation, and sizing up. The moment I crossed that threshold, 1,000 eyes would lock onto me, judging, wondering, speculating. I gave a microscopic nod and stepped forward. My stilettos struck the immaculate marble floor with a clear, rhythmic, terrifyingly stable cadence. The sound wasn't loud, but in the immediate vicinity of the entrance, it somehow magnetized the attention of several guests. The conversations nearest the door abruptly died. Eyes locked onto the column of midnight blue. The initial casual glances rapidly mutated into shocked stares, and then a wave of profound, trembling realization. They recognized the unique, irreplaceable style of that gown. More importantly, they recognized the suite of sapphires that, even in a room dripping with diamonds, was an absolute, annihilating flex of wealth. And then, they recognized my face. Or rather, what my face represented. The hushed whispers spread like a drop of blood in a shark tank, rippling rapidly toward the center of the ballroom. "That's the Sterling family. Richard Sterling's only daughter. She actually came back from Europe? God. That sapphire set? Is that the Midnight Ocean from the Sotheby's auction? She's even more intimidating than the rumors." I acted as if I heard nothing. My steps were unhurried, walking down the burgundy carpet toward the head tables. My assistant maintained the half-step distance, eyes sharp, scanning the perimeter. My security detail had already melted into the crowd of waiters and guests. More and more eyes fixated on my back. Curiosity, awe, calculation. There were no secrets in this echelon. The notoriously reclusive Sterling heiress making her first public appearance was a nuclear-level signal. Then, from a specific direction, I heard a jarring noise. It sounded like someone had violently knocked over a champagne flute. The sharp sound of shattering glass was grotesquely out of place against the backdrop of manufactured elegance. I didn't turn my head, but my peripheral vision locked onto the source. Preston Vance and Chloe Sutton were standing right there. Chloe was wearing a blindingly tacky, hot pink sequined mermaid gown, the neckline plunging to a dangerous depth. A massive, gaudy diamond necklace choked her throat, making her look like a walking disco ball. The sweet, demure smile she had clearly practiced in the mirror for hours was completely frozen on her face. Her eyes were blown wide, staring fixedly at my blue silhouette as if she were looking at a terrifying monster. Her mouth hung open, her bright red lipstick looking slightly twisted from the sheer force of her shock. Her hands, wrapped around Preston's arm, clamped down uncontrollably. Her manicured nails were probably digging straight through his suit jacket. Preston's reaction was far more layered. At first, driven by the collective stare of the room and Chloe's violent flinch, he had looked over. When his eyes landed on my face, there was a split second of confusion. It was as if he were seeing someone incredibly familiar who absolutely, under no circumstances, belonged in this room. Then, the confusion warped into apocalyptic horror. His pupils contracted into pinpricks. The blood drained from his face at a visible speed, leaving even his lips chalk white. He looked as if he had been struck by liquid nitrogen, paralyzed on the spot. Inside those eyes, the same eyes that used to look at Claire Simmons with a condescending, entitled superiority, was a violent storm of shock, bewilderment, and a rapidly rising, suffocating terror of realizing he had been played. The older couple they had been trying to network with noticed their bizarre reaction. Following their gaze, the couple saw me. Instantly, the couple plastered on polite, almost sycophantic smiles, clearly recognizing my identity, and completely ignored Preston and Chloe. I didn't break my stride for a millisecond. I glided past them as if they were nothing more than a smudge of dirt on the baseboards, two buzzing insects entirely unworthy of my attention. My target was the head table, but just as I passed them, Preston finally managed to tear a sound out of his paralyzed throat. He stumbled a half step forward unconsciously, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. His voice was cracked, raw, and barely coherent as it ripped out of him. Claire, in the sudden hush of that section of the ballroom, that name rang out with deafening clarity. Several nearby billionaires and socialites heard it. Their faces shifted into expressions of deep intrigue and mockery, looking back and forth between the sweating Preston and my retreating blue figure. Chloe snapped out of her trance. She violently yanked Preston's arm, her voice shrill and laced with unconcealable panic and warning. "Preston, what the hell are you saying? That is the sterling heiress." Being pulled by her, Preston seemed to realize his catastrophic breach of etiquette, but his eyes were still glued to my face, filled with a desperate need to verify, to interrogate, and a tidal wave of confusion. He was desperately trying to find even a single trace of the submissive Claire Simmons in the cold woman walking past him. I stopped walking, not because he called that name, but because I had reached my table. The titans of industry seated there had already stood up, their faces beaming with welcoming smiles. I turned my head slightly, the corner of my eye sweeping over Preston and Chloe with absolute freezing apathy. The look was exactly how one would look at two pieces of trash on the sidewalk. Then I turned to my table mates, giving a perfectly calibrated, politely distant smile. "Mr. Whitmore, Mr. DuPont, Mrs. Astor, good evening. My father asked me to send you all his warmest regards. Mr. Whitmore, the patriarch hosting the event, smiled so wide his eyes crinkled. So glad you could make it. Richard is a lucky man to have such an extraordinary daughter. Please, have a seat." The others echoed the sentiment, their attitudes overflowing with respect and warmth. The mere arrival of one person had elevated the entire atmosphere of the table. No one paid a single shred of attention to the pale, vibrating couple standing a few yards away. I sat down elegantly. A waiter instantly rushed forward to pour champagne at the perfect temperature. I could feel Preston's gaze still drilling into my back, scorching, chaotic, in utter disbelief. I could imagine Chloe frantically whispering at him, trying to drag him away from the scene. Just then, another figure approached. It was Julian Hayes. He held a tumbler of whiskey, a predatory, half-smiling expression on his face. He nodded to Mr. Whitmore and the others, then locked eyes with me. He raised his glass. "Miss Sterling, I've heard a lot about you. Welcome back." His approach drew even more eyes. Julian Hayes taking the initiative to greet someone carried a massive implication. I raised my champagne flute, tapping the rim lightly against the bottom of his glass, a subtle dominance play. "Mr. Hayes, a pleasure. My father has mentioned you. Young and formidable." Julian chuckled. He threw a highly intentional, mocking glance toward the distant, shell-shocked Preston and lowered his voice so only we could hear. It seems Miss Sterling's return has instantly turned some people's sweet dreams into a living nightmare. This show is off to a spectacular start. I took a sip of champagne, my face unreadable. You're joking, Mr. Hayes. I'm merely returning things to their rightful owners and putting people in their proper places. A flash of deep appreciation and understanding crossed Julian's eyes. He didn't press further. With a polite smile, he turned and walked away. But his attitude had broadcasted a clear message to the entire room. Hayes Capital recognized and welcomed the Sterling heiress. This rapid-fire sequence of events my identity confirmed. The warm reception from the billionaire hosts, Julian Hayes's proactive allegiance acted like a series of invisible, brutal slaps across the faces of Preston and Chloe. I didn't need to look back to know what they looked like. Chloe's arrogant delusion and tacky dress had been atomized by the crushing weight of real money and absolute pedigree, turning her into a pathetic clown. Preston's shock and anger were entirely impotent against the cruel reality. They thought they had climbed to the peak, completely unaware that they had just been permanently stripped of the right to even look at the real summit. The gala's program continued. The MC was on stage giving standard pleasantries before the charity auction. But for some people, this night was already over. Or rather, their nightmare had just begun. I gently swirled the crystal flute, watching the tiny gold bubbles rise. Did Preston recognize me? Don't rush. This is just the appetizer. The charity auction proceeded smoothly. Jewelry, art, and private items donated by the elites were auctioned off. The guests bid token amounts for good PR. I could feel two gazes burning into my back the entire time. One was chaotic and desperate. The other was laced with pure, unadulterated terror and a growing, venomous hatred. I sat there, occasionally exchanging a few low words with Mr. Whitmore, completely uninterested in the items on stage. Only when a landscape painting my father had collected years ago and donated for this event was brought out did I raise my paddle. I bought it back at a price significantly higher than market value. It was a show of filial piety and an effortless display of financial supremacy even when doing charity. The Sterlings only buy back their own artifacts. Mr. Whitmore praised the move. I smiled politely. Things returning to where they belong is just fate. The more relaxed I was, the more flawlessly I blended into this summit of power, the more agonizing those two stares became. I could envision the tsunami ravaging Preston's mind. How could the docile, ordinary Claire Simmons, whom he believed he could discard like a used napkin, transform into the untouchable Sterling heiress? It destroyed his entire reality. It was an invisible sledgehammer smashing his pathetic superiority complex to dust. As the auction wrapped up, the MC announced the open networking session. The jazz music swelled. Guests broke into small groups. Just as I prepared to stand and greet a few other legacy family heads, a figure carrying an oppressive, desperate energy blocked my path. It was Preston. His face was still pale, but he had forcibly suppressed the shock in his eyes, replacing it with the fury of a man who felt he had been conned, fighting to maintain a crumbling facade of composure. His breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling beneath his bespoke suit. Chloe was cowering half a step behind him, gripping his arm with a death grip. Her face was the color of wet chalk. Her heavily made-up eyes stared at me, failing to hide the virulent jealousy and panic inside. The surrounding chatter instantly died down. Countless eyes darted over. Everyone loves a bloodbath. Preston's Adam's apple bobbed. His voice was slightly steadier than before, but still carried a taut, raspy edge. He looked at my face and spoke, emphasizing every single word. Miss Sterling, have we met somewhere before? It was a stupid question, reeking of a final, desperate struggle. He wanted a denial. He wanted me to say it was just a coincidence of identical faces. He wanted to wake up from this nightmare. I slowly raised my eyes, my gaze landing calmly on his face. The look I gave him was the exact look one gives a completely irrelevant stranger, laced with a very faint, almost imperceptible trace of confusion. I did not answer immediately. I merely swirled the remaining champagne in my glass, as if contemplating a vastly unimportant riddle. This absolute dismissal, this weaponized silence, humiliated Preston far worse than any screaming match could. A vein throbbed violently at his temple. Chloe couldn't take it anymore. She forced a smile that looked worse than a crying fit. Her shrill voice cut in. Preston, you must be mistaken. Someone of Miss Sterling's status and grace couldn't possibly be. She didn't finish, but the implication was loud and clear. Couldn't possibly be the cheap trash you dumped. I finally spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it projected with a natural, freezing authority that required no effort. Excuse me, sir, do I know you? Preston looked as if the words physically stabbed him. He lunged a half step forward. nearly violating the absolute minimum threshold of high society personal space. His eyes were psychotic, locked onto my face. "Claire, stop playing games. What the hell are you trying to pull? How could you possibly be a stirmister?" "Whoever you are," I interrupted him. The polite veneer dropped instantly, exposing the lethal, ice-cold steel underneath. "Watch your tone. First of all, I am Victoria Sterling." I leaned forward ever so slightly, dropping my voice to a volume only the three of us could hear clearly, speaking slowly and precisely. "You seem to be severely misreading the situation. It's not about what I am trying to pull. It's about the fact that you and this Miss Sutton beside you owe me and the Sterling family a massive explanation." I straightened back up, my voice returning to its normal volume, but carrying an unquestionable imperial weight. For personal reasons, the daughter of the Sterling family spent the last 3 years living under an alias to experience a normal life. During that time, it appears someone mistook that alias for a target they could casually humiliate and degrade. My eyes swept over Preston, then Chloe, before finally looking at the heavy-hitting billionaires gathering closer to watch the carnage. My father is extremely displeased by this, and personally, I find it highly offensive. Highly offensive. 2 featherlight words that landed like sledgehammers across Preston and Chloe's faces. Preston was entirely obliterated. A deafening roar filled his ears. Personal reasons. Experience a normal life. Alias. So those 3 years. It wasn't Claire Simmons reaching beyond her station to climb into his bed. It was the absolute royalty of the Sterling dynasty hiding her crown to lower herself to his pathetic level. And what did he do? He used the most public, humiliating method possible to throw her away like garbage at his own wedding. All for a woman like Chloe. A tidal wave of cosmic absurdity and apocalyptic terror crushed his previous rage. In this moment, every question he asked, every demand he made, felt like he was slapping his own face. He hadn't offended a helpless orphan. He had offended the Sterling Empire, an entity that could snap Vance Enterprises in half without breaking a sweat. Chloe's legs gave out entirely. She was only kept upright by her death grip on Preston's arm. She finally realized that the golden ticket she had schemed so hard to steal wasn't a billionaire husband. It was a live grenade that was about to blow her and her entire family into radioactive ash. Just then, Mr. Whitmore walked over. His face was thunderous. He had clearly heard my statement. He looked sternly at Preston. "Mr. Vance, tonight is a charity gala. It is not the venue to air your personal grievances. If you have some sort of misunderstanding with Miss Sterling, I suggest you handle it in private. Do not harass my guests." The words were polite, but the execution was unmistakable. Preston Vance was officially persona non grata in this room. Preston's face cycled through red, purple, and finally a deathly gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was so dry no sound came out. He looked around and saw the titans of industry who might have spoken to him earlier, now averting their eyes, their faces plastered with disgust, whispering among themselves. He knew that after tonight, his reputation in the elite circle was completely annihilated. Chloe couldn't take the psychological pressure anymore. With a sob, she tugged at him. "Preston, let's go. Please." She just wanted to flee, to escape the hundreds of eyes that were stripping her bare and mocking her to death. Preston gave my face one last agonizing look. His eyes were a cocktail of shock, infinite regret, bitterness, and the dead ash of total defeat. He finally realized exactly what he had lost. But he had no right, and no courage, to say a single word. He spun around, practically dragging the limp Chloe with him, fleeing toward the exit under the cynical, judging stares of New York's elite. There was no trace of the arrogant CEO left in his retreating back. I didn't spare them another glance. I picked up a fresh flute of perfectly chilled champagne from a passing waiter and raised it toward Mr. Whitmore and the elders around me, my flawless smile returning. A minor distraction. I apologize for interrupting the evening. A toast to you all. It was as if the confrontation that had just executed Preston and Chloe's social lives was nothing more than a mild gust of wind. But everyone in the room knew the truth. From this night forward, Preston Vance and his true love were the biggest jokes in Manhattan. And Victoria Sterling had announced her return with absolute, unforgiving brutality. If a dog bites you, you don't bite it back. You pick up a steel pipe and shatter its legs in front of the entire city. How did that pipe feel, Preston? The void left by Preston and Chloe's pathetic retreat was quickly filled by the returning swell of jazz music and the deliberately elevated chatter of the ballroom. But the air was fundamentally altered. There was a tacit, shared thrill of excitement, a collective digestion of the brutal conflict they had just witnessed. And, inevitably, countless gazes refocused on my blue silhouette, the implications far heavier than before. I remained seated, taking tiny sips of champagne, acting as if I had just brushed a speck of dust off my shoulder. Mr. Whitmore and the others had returned to their normal expressions, but whenever they looked at me, the polite veneer was reinforced by genuine gravity and a microscopic layer of intense caution. The sterling heiress wasn't just old money, she was a ruthless executioner who left no survivors. That realization forced them to upgrade their respect into a profound wariness. Julian Hayes reappeared, a fresh glass of whiskey in hand, leaning casually against a decorative pillar near my chair. His tone was drenched in undisguised amusement. A masterclass in destruction. After tonight, I doubt Preston Vance will dare show his face in this zip code for a very long time. I glanced up at him. Mr. Hayes seems quite pleased with that outcome. Julian chuckled, making no attempt to deny it. Watching someone you despise get annihilated is one of life's great joys. Furthermore, he lowered his voice. The project he stole from me back in the day using underhanded tactics nearly crippled Hayes Capital. I've been holding on to that grudge for a while. I nodded slightly, choosing not to engage further. The enemy of my enemy was currently under observation, but there was no rush to form an alliance. Julian had transmitted his goodwill. That was enough. My assistant stepped out of the shadows, leaning down to whisper in my ear. A cold glint of anticipation flashed in my eyes. I set down my glass and turned to the elders with a polite, apologetic smile. Mr. Whitmore, Mr. DuPont, Mrs. Astor, please excuse me. My father has asked to see me. Mr. Whitmore looked genuinely surprised. Richard is here? He is resting in the penthouse suite upstairs. He heard about the minor disturbance and wants me to come up and brief him, I explained calmly. The elders immediately expressed their understanding, Mr. Whitmore adding, Of course. Send Richard my best. I stood up. Escorted by my assistant and 2 security agents, I left the ballroom and walked toward the private elevator leading to the presidential suite. I knew that the moment I walked out, the gossip regarding me would detonate, and the revelation that my father was in the building would act like a depth charge, making certain people sweat through their bespoke suits. The elevator ascended smoothly. The door to the penthouse suite was slightly ajar. I walked in. The suite possessed a dominating view of the city, dripping with understated luxury. My father was not resting. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door, staring down at the grid of Manhattan lights. Wearing a comfortable cashmere cardigan, his demeanor was serene, but his sharp eyes held absolute, chilling authority. Did you take any damage? No. I just said what needed to be said. He turned around and looked back at the city. That Vance boy and his mother have completely lost their minds over the years. They managed to land a few decent projects, shook a few hands, and suddenly thought they were apex predators. His voice was low, carrying the detached indifference of a god looking at ants. Since they shoved their faces forward, if we didn't slap them, people would think the Sterlings had gone soft. He paused, then added, Preston's mother, Beatrice, pulled every string she had to get a call through to me a few minutes ago. I raised an eyebrow, entirely unsurprised. Beatrice was a rabid social climber and a master manipulator. The idea to swap brides at the altar was almost certainly her brainwave. The news of the Gala massacre making its way back to her would have terrified her to her core. What did she say? My father's mouth twisted into a sneer. What else? Sobbing and wailing, claiming she failed to raise her son properly, that he was bewitched by that Sutton woman. She swore she always viewed you as her own daughter, that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. She begged me for a chance to bring Preston over to grovel and apologize. I found it physically revolting. Viewed me as her own daughter? For 3 years, I remembered every single snide remark, every impossible standard, every thinly veiled insult she hurled at Claire Simmons. What did you tell her? I told her, my father's voice was flat, every word a block of ice, that a daughter of the Sterling family is royalty. Not just anyone has the privilege of misunderstanding her. I told her to save her apologies, because the Sterling family has no interest in accepting them. That statement permanently nuked any delusion the Vance family had of a private settlement or a second chance. Beatrice Vance probably lost half her soul when she heard it. Additionally, my father walked over to the leather sofa and gestured for me to sit. We can accelerate the schedule on Vance Enterprises. Vanguard Peak Capital officially rejected their bridge loan application 15 minutes ago. Reason: failure to pass risk assessment. One of Vanguard Peak's primary shadow backers was the Sterling family. The rejection was always guaranteed. My assistant stepped forward to report. Our assets just accidentally ran into several financial journalists outside the ballroom. They casually mentioned Vance Enterprises' impending liquidity crisis and the severe structural flaws in the Hudson Bay Resort. By tomorrow morning, Wall Street will be reading all about it. The blade of public opinion was out of the sheath. My father looked at me. How far do you want to take this? I remained silent for a moment. Outside the window was the illuminated concrete jungle. Somewhere out there was the Vance Enterprises headquarters, the monument to Preston's ego. I want Preston to fully understand what he threw away. I want him, Chloe, and Beatrice to pay the exact price for every single thing they did. Vance Enterprises doesn't need to file for bankruptcy tomorrow, but it must be violently ripped from its current position. As for them personally, total reputational annihilation, social exile, and complete isolation. I think that is an appropriate conclusion. My father didn't answer immediately. He slowly picked up the Yixing clay teapot from the coffee table, poured himself a cup, and then poured one for me. He took a sip before speaking. Since they decided to trample on another human being's dignity, they must be prepared to have their own dignity ground into the mud. When the Sterlings strike, we strike to ensure everyone in this city witnesses the consequences. Do whatever you want. Requisition whatever resources you need. He set his cup down, his gaze piercing into me like a laser. But remember this, we aren't just doing this to vent your anger. This is an exercise in projecting power. We are reminding this city that the Sterling family is untouchable. You will inherit this empire one day. This is a lesson you must master. Mercy is a tool to be used in the right places. Showing mercy to your enemies is cruelty to yourself. I nodded solemnly. I understand. I stayed in the suite for a little longer, ironing out the corporate strike protocols with him before leaving. When I returned to the ballroom, the gala was winding down. The total amount raised for charity had been announced, sparking polite applause. My re-entry didn't cause a massive commotion, but every single look cast my way was fundamentally different. My father hadn't shown his face, but the fact that he was in the building, combined with the lethal force I had just deployed, sent an unequivocal message. The Sterling Empire was actively engaged in this war, and they stood shoulder to shoulder with Victoria Sterling. Julian raised his glass again, his smile now holding genuine strategic weight. Mr. Whitmore and the other elders were even warmer, casually floating ideas for potential joint ventures in the coming quarters. This was reality. When you display absolute terrifying power and value, the world naturally bends to offer you friendship. The gala finally concluded in an atmosphere of surface-level elegance and violent subterranean currents. Sitting in the Escalade heading back to Greenwich, the night was pitch black. But for certain people, this was destined to be a sleepless night. Right on cue, shortly after leaving the city limits, my assistant looked up from a tablet. Preston Vance has been frantically trying to reach you through intermediaries since the gala ended. He wants a private meeting. He sounds incredibly desperate. I looked out at the blurred trees rushing past the window. Tell him Miss Sterling is extremely busy and has no time for irrelevant people. If it's a corporate emergency, he can file an official meeting request with the office of the CEO at Sterling Holdings and wait for standard processing. My assistant's mouth twitched into a microscopic smirk. Understood. Filing a request through standard channels? A CEO of Preston's mid-tier level couldn't even get a meeting with our chief of staff, let alone me. It was another brutal backhand across his face. Furthermore, the assistant continued, Arthur Sutton, Chloe's father, was just notified by his primary supplier that their contract will not be renewed next quarter. The stated reason was that his company's quality control standards no longer align with their corporate vision. We hadn't even actively pressured that supplier. They were already looking for an excuse to dump Sutton's shady company. We just gave them the gentlest nudge. When a wall is falling, everyone pushes. When the Sterling family openly broadcasts its disgust for the Vance and Sutton families, countless vultures looking to curry favor or avoid collateral damage will happily jump in to stomp on their corpses. This was only the prologue. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the leather headrest. Are you feeling the pressure yet, Preston? This is merely the first breeze from Victoria Sterling and the empire behind her. The actual hurricane hasn't even made landfall. Enjoy your hard-won true love and your rapidly disintegrating kingdom. 3 days after the gala, inside the CEO's office at Vance Enterprises, Preston Vance stared at the monitors displaying several financial news portals and Wall Street blogs. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression demonic. Hudson Bay resort scandal, liquidity crisis, and structural integrity fears. Former real estate darling Vance Enterprises hits the wall. Exclusive. Vance denied bridge loan. Short-term debt bomb ticking. The articles were written with calculated restraint, avoiding outright accusations, but the quotes from industry insiders and sources close to Vance, along with the strategically leaked debt-to-equity ratios and project timelines, acted like surgical needles piercing Vance's most vital arteries. The stock price had been bleeding out since the morning after the gala. Today, it opened with a massive gap down. Although the bleeding was temporarily staunched, the market cap evaporation was a sickening number. Even worse, several partners who were on the verge of signing contracts suddenly became extremely evasive. They either delayed the signings or demanded a total renegotiation of terms. The banks were calling to check in regarding interest payments with terrifying frequency. And all of this began the moment he left that gala. It was Victoria Sterling, not Claire Simmons. That freezing, godlike gaze. Smash! Preston slammed his fist into the heavy mahogany desk, making the expensive penholder jump. He could not accept that the woman who had been so gentle, who had practically worshipped him, harbored such apocalyptic background and power. He could not accept that he had been played for a fool for 3 years, only to hand her the blade to execute him with. Most maddening of all, he couldn't reach her. Every single channel he used to try and contact Victoria Sterling was politely and immovably blocked. The Sterling family was a sudden, massive iceberg emerging from the fog. Gigantic. Freezing. Unshakable. Just the visible tip of it was enough to make his blood run cold with despair. A timid knock on the door. Chloe walked in carrying a cup of coffee. She was dressed down today, but even her heavy makeup couldn't hide her haggard, terrified expression. The humiliation at the gala, and the subsequent rumors spreading like wildfire through high society that she had married into a radioactive disaster zone, made her afraid to leave her apartment. The best friends who had fawned over her just days ago were now sending her straight to voicemail. "Preston, have some coffee. You were up all night." Her voice was sickeningly sweet, laced with extreme caution as she set the cup down. Preston didn't look at the coffee, nor at her. His eyes remained glued to the crashing stock tickers. His voice was sandpaper. "What are you doing in here?" Chloe felt a physical pang of hurt at his freezing tone. She forced herself to walk behind him, reaching out to massage his temples. "I saw how stressed you are. I just wanted to help, don't." Preston jerked his head away, his movement radiating pure disgust. Chloe's hands froze in midair. Her grievance, mixed with a flash of toxic resentment, almost broke through her mask. She pulled her hands back and bit her lip. "Preston, we can't just sit here and wait to die. Victoria is doing this on purpose. She's retaliating against us." Preston slowly turned his head to look at her. His eyes were entirely bloodshot, assessing her with a scrutiny that made her skin crawl. "And didn't we hand her the perfect reason to retaliate? At our wedding. In front of the entire city." He ground the words out through his teeth. He didn't just hate Victoria's deception and her counterattack. He hated his own catastrophic stupidity. He hated Chloe and his mother for whispering poison in his ear. Chloe shrank back a half step, terrified by the violence in his eyes. But her panic and refusal to accept defeat surged forward. She couldn't lose Preston. She couldn't lose the life she had just stolen. If Vance Enterprises collapsed, if Preston blamed her, she didn't dare imagine her fate. A venomous idea, fertilized by days of sheer terror and jealousy, rapidly mutated into a desperate plan. If Victoria Sterling wanted to ruin her life, she would drag Victoria down with her. "Preston, I know I was wrong. I was just too blindly in love with you. I let my jealousy take over." The tears came instantly on command. "But Victoria, she lied to you first. She hid her identity to get close to you. Who knows what sick, twisted agenda she had. She probably planned to destroy Vance from the start. And now that she's succeeded, she's parading around humiliating us." She watched his face carefully. Seeing his brow furrow, she realized that while he wasn't entirely convinced, he was desperate enough to listen. She struck while the iron was hot, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "We can't let her dictate everything. I have an idea. We can make her taste what it feels like to have her reputation destroyed." Preston snapped his head toward her. "What the hell are you planning?" "I'm warning you, do not play games. She is Richard Sterling's daughter." Despite his rage, his remaining sanity knew that fighting the Sterlings head-on was suicide. I know. Chloe waved her hands frantically. "We don't do it in the open. We use the dark web. I know a very discreet private investigator and some people who run massive bot farms and troll accounts. Victoria was allegedly studying abroad for years, right? Who can prove she was a saint over there? We just need to invent a little scandal. Say she was living a degenerate lifestyle, mingling with shady characters, maybe even involved in illegal transactions. We'll fake some blurry photos, pay off some gossip accounts, and unleash the troll farms. We'll make it viral." Her eyes gleamed with the fanaticism of a cornered rat. "Even if we can't inflict structural damage on the Sterling empire, we can make her a toxic asset. We can force the Sterlings to back off Vance just to handle their own PR nightmare. Preston, we cannot just surrender." Preston fell silent. Logic screamed that Chloe's plan carried apocalyptic risk. If the Sterlings traced it back to them, the consequences would be unimaginable. But the inferno of humiliation burning in his chest, combined with the sight of his empire teetering on the edge of the abyss, tore at his sanity like wild dogs. Maybe she was right. Even if it didn't save the company, it would make Victoria bleed. He looked at Chloe's face, contorted with desperation and malice. A flicker of profound alien disgust washed over him. But ultimately, the rage and despair won. Are you absolutely certain? No digital footprint? No evidence leading back to us? Seeing him yield, Chloe felt a surge of manic joy. I promise. I have it all figured out. We'll use untraceable offshore accounts. The guys I'm hiring are professionals. The narrative will be perfect. The billionaire heiress who moonlights as a high-end escort. We'll make it so explosive she won't know what hit her. Preston closed his eyes and waved his hand weakly. Do it. Be careful. I'm on it. Chloe grabbed her purse, rushing out of the office, her steps practically bouncing. She could already visualize Victoria Sterling drowning in a sea of vile rumors, broken and humiliated. What Chloe didn't know was that from the night of the gala, every single digital footprint, text message, and phone call made by her, and anyone within a 10-mile radius of her life, had been under the absolute surveillance of the Sterling intelligence apparatus. She also didn't know that the highly discreet private investigator she contacted had been compromised by my team 3 days ago. That night, in the study of the Greenwich estate, my assistant placed a comprehensive dossier and several audio files on my desk. Chloe Sutton has initiated her protocol. She used 3 proxies to contact a click farm operator in Southeast Asia and a disgraced PI with a fraud conviction. Her plan is to fabricate rumors regarding your time in Europe and mass buy social media algorithms to force it trending. The initial wire transfer came from a hidden offshore account she funded by cashing out the allowance Preston gave her. Here are the logs and the audio intercepts. I tapped the screen, playing the audio. Chloe's voice, hushed but vibrating with venomous excitement, filled the room. Right. Make the photos look like paparazzi shots. The girl's face needs to be photoshopped to look exactly like her. The narrative is, fake aristocratic heiress, actual degenerate party girl doing illegal escorts. I don't care what it costs. I want this exploding everywhere in 3 days. I shut off the recording. My face remained a mask of stone, a cornered rat resorting to gutter tactics. Are the troll operator and the PI secured? Yes. As per your instructions, we are playing along. They are continuing to engage with Chloe, draining her funds and extracting more direct orders. Simultaneously, we have finalized the weaponization of the real dirt on Chloe and her father. We have the IRS tax evasion files, the corporate fraud dockets, and the high-definition, time-stamped evidence of Chloe trading sexual favors for resources with multiple older executives and producers, including her recent target, producer Maxwell. Excellent. I leaned back, tapping my fingers on the leather armrest. If Chloe wanted to play with fire in the court of public opinion, I would let her burn to death in an inferno of her own making. Segment her black files into batches. Start releasing them tomorrow morning through separate, untraceable drops. Start with her father's tax evasion and the substandard materials fraud. Then, escalate to her hotel room transactions with Maxwell and the others. Control the algorithm. Let the fire burn slowly until it consumes oxygen. I paused, looking at the USB drive on the desk. And package all the evidence of Chloe orchestrating this smear campaign against me, the wire transfers, the voice notes, the IP logs into a pristine encrypted file. Once her escort scandal peaks and Preston realizes his true love is a radioactive prostitute, anonymously email that package to him. Understood. That will sever the last microscopic thread of affection between them, and ensure Preston knows exactly why he is being executed. Dismissed. After the assistant left, I walked to the window. The night was vast and dark. Chloe, you thought you could shoot poisoned arrows from the dark? You don't realize the darkness belongs to me. Enjoy the absolute annihilation you've engineered for yourself. And Preston, when you discover that the woman you burned your empire to the ground for is nothing but a cheap, malicious, venomous fraud, what kind of face will you make? At 9:00 a.m. the next morning, Preston hadn't even recovered from his hangover-like migraine when his executive secretary burst into the office, completely ignoring the door. Her face was bloodless. Mr. Vance, disaster, she stammered, her whole body shaking. We just got notified. The Hudson Bay project site was just raided by a joint task force, the EPA, the Department of Buildings, and OSHA. They said they received multiple whistleblower files detailing our use of toxic, subcode building materials and illegal waste dumping. The feds are already on site. They've ordered an immediate, indefinite halt to all construction pending a full federal investigation. Preston shot out of his chair so fast his vision went black for a second. Hudson Bay. That was the linchpin. It was the project carrying their heaviest debt load and their highest projected returns. Shutting it down for a single day cost an astronomical amount. More importantly, the cascading effect of a federal halt bank loan defaults, pre-sale contract breaches, total investor panic was a death sentence. Whistleblowers. Who did this? He roared, the veins in his neck bulging. I don't know, it's strictly classified. But Director Lee, the one leading the raid, we usually have a great relationship with him. This time, he wouldn't even answer our calls. It's completely strictly by the book, terrifyingly so. Preston scrambled for his phone, frantically dialing every politician, lobbyist, and fixer he knew. The calls were either sent to voicemail, or the people on the other end gave him bureaucratic runarounds, politely but firmly stating their hands were tied. He slammed the phone down. A glacial chill shot from the soles of his feet straight to his brain. This wasn't a coincidence. This surgical, apocalyptic strike could only be the Sterling family. They weren't even trying to hide it. They were looking him dead in the eye and saying, "We are executing you, and there is nothing you can do about it." Before he could even process the horror, his head of investor relations sprinted into the room, clutching a tablet. "Mr. Vance, the market opened 30 minutes ago, and we've already plunged 8%. And there are massive, untraceable block trades dumping our stock. We can't hold the line. Twitter and Reddit are exploding, with rumors that our cash chain has snapped and the banks are calling our loans." "Shut up." Preston grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. His chest heaved, his eyes practically bleeding. If the rumors of the liquidity crisis took hold, Vance Enterprises was dead. He forced himself to breathe. He screamed at the IR director, "Activate the Emergency Stabilization Fund, call our institutional allies, beg them to buy the dip. Issue a press release immediately. Say the Hudson Bay raid is a routine compliance check and we will resume operations within 48 hours. Go, now." The IR director scrambled out of the room. Preston collapsed into his leather chair, digging his fingers into his scalp. What do I do? Where can I bridge the capital? Who can I beg? As his brain redlined into a panic attack, his private cell phone rang. It was his mother, Beatrice Vance. The moment he answered, her shrill, hysterical screaming shattered his eardrum. "Preston, have you seen the news? The internet, it's everywhere. That filthy little whore Chloe's scandals are everywhere. And your Uncle Arthur's company is being raided by the IRS for tax fraud and selling toxic drywall. It's over. The Vance family is the laughingstock of the East Coast. I told you that manipulative bitch was poison." Preston's brain emitted a high-pitched ringing sound. He nearly dropped the phone. He lunged over his desk, grabbing his mouse with a violently trembling hand, and pulled up Twitter and the major gossip blogs. The top trending hashtags burned his eyes. Number Chloe Sutton escort files. Vance CEO marries high-end call girl. Number Arthur Sutton toxic drywall fraud. He clicked the top link. It was a forensic-level exposé. High-definition security footage of hotel hallways. Faces partially blurred but undeniably Chloe. Explicit text message, screenshots negotiating prices, and internal emails from Arthur Sutton's company explicitly detailing how to mask subcode materials. The most damning evidence was an audio recording of producer Maxwell, drunk out of his mind, bragging to his friends about exactly what Chloe did to secure an audition, complete with graphic details. The comment sections were absolute bloodbaths. "Laugh my ass off, this is the true love the Vance CEO dumped his fiancée at the altar for? Bro has a fetish for toxic waste. She belongs to the streets, and he gave her a platinum ring. Her dad is a scammer poisoning people with bad drywall. She's a literal prostitute. What a power couple. I actually felt bad for the girl he humiliated at the wedding. Now, he got exactly what he deserved. Vance CEO is legally blind, gave up the Sterling heiress for a walking STD. Every single comment was a poisoned dagger driving straight into Preston's retinas. A wave of severe nausea hit him. His temples pulsed violently. Was this real? The innocent, fragile, pure-hearted Chloe, who claimed she was different from other girls, was this who she actually was? And her humble, hardworking father? The tsunami of betrayal, disgust, and humiliation drowned him. Compared to the corporate assassination, this total, agonizing destruction of his manhood and his ego was infinitely worse. He thought of Chloe's pathetic, teary eyes. He thought of her swearing she was just networking with those producers. He thought of her standing in this very office yesterday, plotting a smear campaign against Victoria Sterling. Preston let out a guttural, animalistic roar, grabbing his computer monitor and ripping it off the desk, sending it crashing to the floor. At that exact moment, the office door was pushed open again. It was Chloe. Her eyes were swollen red, her hair a mess. She had clearly seen the news and was on the absolute brink of a psychological breakdown. Preston! Preston, you have to believe me. It's all fake. Someone is framing me. It's Victoria. She photoshopped everything. Chloe lunged forward, trying to grab his arm, her voice hitting a dog whistle pitch of panic. Preston violently threw her off. The force was so immense, Chloe tripped in her heels and collapsed onto the carpet. He towered over her, his eyes devoid of any trace of the love he once claimed to have. All that remained was revulsion, pure hatred, and the chilling coldness of looking at a pile of radioactive garbage. Fake? His voice was a raspy, terrifying whisper. The hotel surveillance is fake? The wire transfers are fake? The IRS raid on your father is fake? Chloe, how much more shit are you hiding? How long have you been playing me for a fucking idiot? No, Preston. Listen to me. Chloe sat on the floor, makeup running down her face in black streaks, crying hysterically. The beautiful, manicured mask was gone. I was forced. They forced me. I did it for us. I did it so I could be worthy of you. I love you, Preston. Everything I did was for love. Love? Preston laughed, a deranged, terrifying sound. He pointed at the shattered monitor on the floor, screaming at the top of his lungs. You sold your body to Hollywood slime for love? Your father sold toxic materials to my flagship project for love? You tried to use gutter tactics to frame Victoria Sterling, failed spectacularly, and dragged my family's name into a global sewer for love? Your love makes me want to vomit. Chloe sat frozen, paralyzed by the sheer violence of his verbal assault. The primal terror of losing her meal ticket made her completely lose her mind. What about you, Preston? She shrieked back, her face contorting. You think you're so clean? If your snob of a mother didn't hate Claire for being poor, if she didn't push you to pick me, would you have done it? You're blaming me now that everything is falling apart. If you weren't so fucking stupid that you didn't even know you were sleeping with a billionaire heiress, we wouldn't be in this mess. Her words were a serrated knife twisting in the deepest, most agonizing wound in his psyche. She was right. He blamed Chloe. He blamed his mother. But ultimately, he was the one who made the choice. He was the one who, for the sake of his ego and a pathetic illusion of control, threw a genuine diamond into the dirt and proudly paraded a piece of shattered glass. An endless abyss of regret and despair opened up beneath him, making his knees buckle. Right at that second, his private phone chimed. It was an encrypted email from an unknown sender. The subject line, a small gift regarding your wife's PR campaign. From VS. His hand shaking violently, he opened the zip file. Inside were the complete, unredacted transcripts, audio files, IP logs, and offshore wire receipts detailing exactly how Chloe had planned to frame Victoria as an escort just 24 hours ago. Attached was a single line of text. Miss Sterling is fully aware and reserves the right to pursue federal cyber-stalking charges. Pfft. Preston coughed violently, a spray of actual blood splattering across his pristine white shirt and the expensive carpet. His vision went completely black. He swayed, grabbing the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. It was over. It was all over. Commercially, the Sterling empire had a knee on his throat. Socially, Chloe's scandals had turned him into the ultimate punchline. And legally, they had ironclad proof of his complicity in a conspiracy to defame one of the most powerful women in the world. He and Vance Enterprises were a sinking rowboat in a Category 5 hurricane, staring up at the invincible icebreaker that was the Sterling family. There was no escape. Chloe saw him cough blood and let out a blood-curdling scream, scrambling backward, terrified he was going to lunge and strangle her to death. Preston didn't even look at her. He leaned heavily against the desk, slowly, painfully straightening his spine, and looked out the window toward the skyline, toward the general direction of Greenwich. Victoria, you won. You only showed up for 10 minutes. You barely even lifted a finger, and you pushed my entire existence into the incinerator. What a flawless execution. He let out a hollow, agonizing laugh, a sound filled with bottomless bitterness and despair, and the storm hadn't even reached its peak. The news of Preston Vance coughing blood and collapsing, along with the apocalyptic screaming match in his office, leaked to Wall Street by that afternoon. But even that was overshadowed by the confirmation of Arthur Sutton's arrest and the absolute radioactive fallout of Chloe's escort scandal. Beatrice Vance, suffering a severe panic attack, was admitted to a VIP suite at a private hospital. While hooked up to an IV, she weakly cursed Chloe as a succubus who destroyed her family, while simultaneously weeping over her own tragic fate and her son's catastrophic stupidity for offending the Sterlings. Preston, who was rushed to the same hospital, was diagnosed with extreme stress-induced acute hypertension and a minor ulcer rupture. He needed absolute rest. But how could he rest? Laying in the hospital bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, his mind played a relentless highlight reel of the last 3 years. Claire Simmons smiling quietly, his cold announcement at the altar, the freezing, sovereign gaze of Victoria Sterling at the gala, the horrific files detailing Chloe's whoredom, regret, fury, humiliation, despair, and a bone-deep, paralyzing terror gnawed at his heart like a million parasites. He knew Vance Enterprises was likely dead. The Sterlings didn't need to do anything else. The banks and the opportunistic vultures on Wall Street would rip his company apart for them. Just then, the door to his VIP room clicked open. It wasn't a doctor or a nurse. It was Julian Hayes. Seeing Julian, Preston's pupils shrank, his body instantly going rigid like a trapped animal. Julian wore his signature, condescending half-smile. He held a ridiculously expensive fruit basket, which he dropped casually onto the bedside table. CEO Vance, heard you were under the weather. Thought I'd drop by. He pulled up a chair and sat down, crossing his legs in an impossibly relaxed posture, as if visiting an old college buddy. You look terrible, Julian. Are you here to laugh at me? Preston's voice was a gravelly croak, his eyes venomous. Laugh at you? Julian raised an eyebrow. Preston, you are the biggest joke in Manhattan right now. I don't need to come to a hospital to laugh at you. I can do that from my penthouse. The words were delivered casually, but they cut like a scalpel. I actually came because I was curious. And to tell you a little bedtime story I suspect you are completely unaware of. Preston stared at him with pure hatred. What story? Julian slowly adjusted his bespoke cuffs. It's about Miss Victoria Sterling, or, as you knew her, Claire Simmons. Why do you think she suddenly appeared in your life 3 years ago under a fake name? Preston's heart plummeted. A new, sickening dread took hold of him. Did you know, Julian began, speaking like a historian recounting an ancient tragedy, that the Sterling and Vance families actually had a connection decades ago? Your late father, the original founder, was actually something of a friend to Richard Sterling. They even joked, over drinks, that if they had a son and a daughter, they might arrange a union. Preston froze. He had never heard his mother mention this. His father died early and he took over young. Much of the old history was lost to him. After your father passed, your mother and you took over. Vance Enterprises grew, but the Sterlings ascended to a level you can't even comprehend, Julian continued. About 3 years ago, Richard Sterling remembered his old friend. He decided to test the waters, to see what kind of man the Vance heir had become. If you were capable, honorable, and worthy, the Sterlings were prepared to honor that old joke, form an alliance, and elevate Vance Enterprises to the global stage. Preston stopped breathing. The blood in his veins literally turned to ice. 3 years ago. A fake name. A test. An alliance. Sadly, Julian spread his hands, his tone dripping with lethal mockery. You and your mother put on a spectacular performance. Your treatment of Claire Simmons, your arrogance, your mother's relentless bullying, and finally, that cinematic masterpiece of a wedding where you swapped brides completely horrified the Sterling family. Julian leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Preston's chalk-white, horrified face. Richard Sterling viewed your actions not just as an unforgivable insult to his daughter, but as a total betrayal of his late friend's memory. You didn't just fail the test, Preston. You nuked the testing facility. Julian enunciated his next words with brutal clarity. So, what the Sterlings are doing to you now isn't just Victoria getting revenge for a broken heart. This is the Sterling Empire permanently closing the book on an old friendship. You and your mother didn't just throw away the greatest alliance in American corporate history. You personally signed the death warrant for your own company. You didn't offend Victoria. You offended the entire Sterling dynasty's concept of honor. Boom. Julian's words struck Preston like a tactical nuke, vaporizing his soul. So that was it. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't some twisted undercover game. It was the ultimate golden ticket. A chance to stand at the absolute apex of the world. And what had he and his mother done? They treated the princess of the Sterling Empire like a disposable peasant. They mocked her. And he, for a venomous, diseased fraud like Chloe, had publicly executed Victoria's dignity. He didn't just lose an ex-girlfriend. He personally shredded the lifeline that would have made him a king, and then spat on it. Preston let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the howl of a damned soul in hell. He violently shot up from the bed, grabbing his own hair with both hands, pulling so hard his knuckles turned white. His entire body convulsed. The anger and regret from before were nothing compared to this. This was a soul-crushing, absolute self-loathing, and a terror so profound it shattered his mind. He remembered his mother sneering at Claire's cheap clothes. He remembered his own annoyance when Claire asked for his time. He remembered Chloe's smug little smirks when she undermined Claire. In Victoria's eyes, they must have looked like literal apes playing with fire. Frogs at the bottom of a well, aggressively mocking a dragon that had temporarily folded its wings. Julian watched Preston's psychological collapse with the cold eyes of an apex predator. He felt zero pity. He came today to permanently break Preston's mind and to deposit a favor in the Sterling family's bank. "Oh, right," Julian added, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "One last thing. That toxic drywall your father-in-law sold to your Hudson Bay project? Turns out a significant portion of those invoices were explicitly approved by your mother, Beatrice." Arthur Sutton kicked back a massive bribe to her offshore account. "The DOJ and the SEC are currently subpoenaing those records. Your mother is likely going to federal prison." The final pillar snapped. Preston's head whipped up. His eyes were completely blood red. A thick stream of fresh blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. He looked at Julian, tried to speak, but only managed a wet, gurgling gasp. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed backward onto the pillows, flatlining into unconsciousness. Julian stared at the comatose CEO. He adjusted his tie, turned on his heel, and walked out. The news spread like a virus. Vance CEO suffers hemorrhagic collapse. Vance matriarch Beatrice indicted for federal bribery. The Vance family permanently blacklisted by the Sterlings. This stripped away the very last illusion of Vance Enterprises' viability. The banks called in the loans immediately. Meanwhile, in the study of the Greenwich estate, I sat across from my father, sipping a rare oolong tea. "Julian Hayes knows how to deliver a message," my father noted, fully aware of the hospital visit. He wanted to declare his allegiance, and he needed a punching bag. "I don't mind," I replied calmly. My father nodded. "Vance is finished. Beatrice is facing a grand jury. Preston has suffered a total psychological break. The board is in open mutiny, trying to liquidate whatever shares they can. We are in the perfect position to execute a hostile asset strip. Yes, bankrupting them is satisfying, but carving out their premium assets for pennies on the dollar and absorbing them into Sterling Holdings is the mathematically correct play. Revenge and business were not mutually exclusive. Handle it however you see fit," my father said. "I have no real interest in Vance's portfolio, but forcing Preston to sign away his grandfather's legacy to the woman he humiliated seems like poetic justice. As for the Suttons," my father's eyes glinted with cold steel. "Arthur Sutton is looking at 20 years in federal lockup. And Chloe. She is a total pariah. She will never show her face in this hemisphere again." He looked at me. "Are you satisfied?" I fell silent. I remembered the blinding lights at the wedding, the cold dismissal in Preston's voice. Chloe's fake, triumphant smile. "I am," I finally said. It wasn't mercy. It was the knowledge that for people like Preston and Chloe, who worshipped vanity and status above oxygen, being stripped of everything, ground into the dirt, and forced to live the rest of their pathetic lives in absolute humiliation and infinite regret was a punishment far worse than prison or bankruptcy. "Good." My father set his cup down. "Let legal and acquisitions clean up the gore. It's time for you to look forward." I understood. Revenge was just clearing the trash off the driveway. The real journey was just beginning. The morning sun poured through the windows, flooding the room with gold. Preston, Chloe, Beatrice, their chapter was over. But Victoria Sterling's story was just opening a brand new, glorious page. When Preston woke up again, it was twilight. The VIP hospital room was dead silent, save for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. He felt like his skeleton had been hollowed out. Moving a single finger required a Herculean effort. His brain was a blank slate, until the memories flooded back like acid. Julian's words. The lost alliance, his mother's indictment, Chloe's whoredom, the death of his empire. He let out a broken, rattling sob. Tears of absolute, unfiltered despair rolled down his temples. It wasn't sadness. It was the physiological response of a human being whose reality had been atomized. He had never felt so microscopic, so pathetic. He was the clown performing his heart out on stage, completely unaware that the audience was laughing at his execution. The door opened. It wasn't a doctor. It was the interim COO of Vance Enterprises, an old loyalist named Marcus. His face was the color of cement, clutching a thick stack of legal binders. "Mr. Vance," Marcus's voice cracked. Preston slowly, agonizingly turned his eyes to look at him. "The consortium of banks has issued the final demand letter. We have exactly 7 days to clear the principal and penalties on the Hudson Bay Bridge loan. If we fail, they will petition a federal judge for immediate liquidation and freeze all corporate and personal assets. Every word was a nail in the coffin. Furthermore, Marcus swallowed hard, placing the topmost binder on the bedside table. This is a formal acquisition offer from the M&A division of Sterling Holdings. They are offering to buy out our 5 premium assets, including the Hudson Bay site, at exactly 30 cents on the dollar. The capital injection is precisely enough to cover the immediate bank debt to avoid a federal freeze, leaving the shell of Vance Enterprises with 0 assets and 0 liquidity, 30 cents on the dollar. It was a predatory, humiliating execution. But Marcus knew, and Preston knew, that this was the only way to prevent Preston from facing personal bankruptcy and potential federal fraud charges related to his mother's actions. It was the Sterlings offering him a razor blade to cut his own throat instead of being burned alive. Preston stared at the signature line on the document. Victoria Sterling, Executive Vice President. The elegant, sharp signature burned his retinas like staring into the sun. She wanted to watch him die, and she wanted to squeeze the last drop of blood from his corpse while doing it. "Sign it," Preston gasped, the 2 words tearing his throat to shreds. Marcus let out a defeated sigh, leaving the documents on the table, and quietly backed out of the room. The room returned to a dead silence. Preston stared at the ceiling, nothing more than a hollowed-out husk. Meanwhile, in a dingy, unlit apartment in Queens, a secret fallback property Preston didn't even know about, Chloe Sutton was having a nervous breakdown. She had been hiding here for 2 days. The blinds were drawn. Her phone was dead. She was terrified of seeing her own face on the news, terrified of the debt collectors. Bang, bang, bang. Violent pounding shook the cheap door, accompanied by a man's brutal roar. "Chloe, open the damn door. We know you're in there. When is your father paying back the shark loan? Hiding won't save you, you stupid bitch. Open the door, or I swear to God I'll print out every single one of those hotel screenshots and plaster them across this entire borough." It was the loan sharks her father had borrowed from to cover his failing company. Chloe collapsed to the floor, clapping her hands over her ears, screaming in silent terror. The banging continued for 20 minutes before the thugs finally left, promising to return tomorrow with crowbars. Chloe curled into a fetal position in the dark, sobbing uncontrollably. Preston was gone. Her father was going to prison. The loan sharks wanted her blood. Her reputation was worse than a serial killer's. Every bridge she ever built was burned. She just wanted to be a billionaire's wife. She just wanted to be better than Claire Simmons. Why did it end up like this? No one answered her. Outside the grimy window, the Manhattan skyline glowed in the distance, but not a single light in that city belonged to her. 1 week later, the main executive boardroom at Vance Enterprises. The atmosphere was as heavy as a lead vault. On one side of the mahogany table sat Marcus and the remaining broken executives of Vance. On the other side sat only 3 people: Victoria Sterling, her executive assistant, and the chief legal officer of Sterling Holdings. I wore a pristine white Tom Ford suit, my hair pulled back into a razor-sharp chignon, my makeup immaculate. I was here in my official capacity as executive vice president of Sterling Holdings to sign the asset transfer. Marcus looked at the final contract, his hands trembling. "Miss Sterling," Marcus croaked, using the ultimate honorific. "Is there any room to negotiate this valuation?" I raised my eyes, my gaze pinning him to his chair. "Marcus, you are a veteran of this industry. You know full well that this offer is the absolute ceiling based on your current legal liability and risk profile. If Vance has a better alternative, you are welcome to decline." Decline? They were staring down the barrel of a federal shotgun. Marcus let out a bitter, tragic laugh. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen, looking at the empty CEO chair at the head of his side of the table. Preston didn't show up. He couldn't. He had locked himself in his family's crumbling estate, refusing to see the sun. Marcus signed the papers, effectively ending Vance Enterprises' existence as a major player. My assistant handed me a pen. With fluid, lethal grace, I signed Victoria Sterling. The dust had settled. Walking out of the Vance building, I stepped into the back of my Escalade. We drove straight to the Sterling Holdings skyscraper in Financial District. My new office on the 80th floor was ready. It was twice the size of Preston's, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the entire concrete empire of New York. Standing by the glass, bathed in the blinding afternoon sun, I looked down at the city. I remembered standing in the hotel corridor. I remembered the heavy wedding dress. I remembered the coldness in Preston's eyes and the arrogant smirk on Chloe's face. Now, Vance's core assets were mine. Preston was a broken ghost. Chloe was a hunted rat in the slums. Beatrice was waiting for a federal trial. The fire of revenge had burned away the humiliation of the past. My phone vibrated. A text from my mother. "Coming home for dinner tonight? Your father is personally cooking your favorite." A genuine warm smile finally reached my eyes. I typed back, "On my way." Another message popped up. "Julian Hayes. Congratulations, Miss Sterling. Heard the Vance acquisition closed. Drinks next week to discuss future synergies?" I replied, "Have your office contact mine. We'll see." I put the phone down and looked back out at the endless horizon. I no longer needed to hide my identity. I was Victoria Sterling, the future commander of a global empire. The past 3 years hadn't broken me. They had forged me into a weapon of absolute precision. I knew exactly what I wanted and exactly how to annihilate anyone who stood in my way. Revenge was never the final destination. It was just clearing the debris off the runway. The real journey had just begun, and the sky was mine.